really my job is to teach people good theology about God through song, and then also let it be expressive.
Welcome to Footnotes, a behind-the-scenes look at what we value and why it matters here at Foothill Church in Glendora, California. My name is Stephen Coppenrath. I'm one of the pastors on staff, and I am your host. I think I've been holding off in some ways having Ike on the podcast because the moment you speak into the mic, it becomes clear how wispy and effeminate my voice sounds compared to your low baritone boom when you speak.
Yeah, well, I really love talking to you, Stephen.
I feel like I'm on coast. I'm on coast right now. Like it's like 10:15 at night, and I've like called in, and I got Ike on the radio.
Stephen, why are you calling today? How can we listen?
Well, you see, I've had some trouble with relationships lately, and I just really want to. This song goes out to Katie. We might edit that out. We'll see. So one of the many things that Ike and I have in common is we have a lot of interests: food, movies, good internet memes. So we could really talk about a lot of things. We actually have a lot in common just as far as life too. I mean, our marriage timeline, kids running in parallel as well. So let's just start there. Tell us a little bit about you and your family a bit.
Yeah, no, Jessica and I met in high school. So we were high school sweethearts. Jessica and I have been married for 16 years, and we dated. When I say dated, remember high school, like going out is a thing. Yeah. So we were going out for a while.
I actually mentioned this last week on the podcast, but you didn't hear it. It's okay. Yeah, going out was a thing.
Going out was.
It's like in the between the 1950s and the 1980s. I feel like going steady was a thing. Yeah. And like the 90s, it switched to like, will you go out with me?
I know,
right?
It really was. It was a new definition. We didn't really know what it meant. It was because if we knew what it meant, it would be like, let's go out to the snack shack.
It is confusing too, because it's like, do you mean like right now? Like, do you want to go out with me right now? Where are we going? It's like, no, I mean like go out, like like we're going out.
It's kind of like saying, do you want to go out with my mom because she has to drive us there?
That's an interesting example. Yeah.
Oh yeah. So anyway, we were married 16 years and. Had a lot of adventures together. We have 4 kids. They're all very loud, which is okay as long as I think one of the things I learned, raising kids, it's less of a proving ground, more of a learning ground, And so as long as you just take all that energy and just direct it the right way, hopefully they'll be loud when they need to, and they'll speak gently when they need to be.
Yeah, Ike was actually hired originally 6 years ago. 6 years?
5.5, yeah.
5.5, yeah. As our comms minister, which I may have had some hand in that job title, and it's not a very good one, for the record.
It was kind of cool.
You like it still?
Comms was fun. It was a little bit like, ooh, what is that? It's provocative.
Yeah. I don't know about provocative. So he was overseeing community and communication. But as of about 2 years ago, when our friends Shane and Katie Marks left for Kansas, there was a shift in your responsibilities towards worship. So, walk us through. Actually, that's not new for you. Obviously, that's something that you've been involved in a long time. Yeah. Walk us through your experience with church worship ministry over the years.
Man, it started early. My dad was a volunteer worship leader. He was talented, but he just loved the church. He was he was there early. He was leaving late. Chat with people. So 8th grade, as soon as I could play, I just started playing. I remember asking my dad, like, "Oh, Dad, I want to play electric guitar." My dad's like, "You can play electric guitar." I'm like, "Yeah, Dad, I want to do the cool solo. I want a distortion pedal, Dad, or a chorus pedal,
a delay pedal.
I want a delay and chorus."
You too, of course, yeah.
And he said, "Well, if you want to be in a band, you need to play bass or drums." I want to be in a band, and it was actually good because I like to think I'm quick, but I'm not actually as intellectually quick as a lot of other people. So having bass guitar with only 4 strings to learn on was a great stepping stone. I get by a lot just with a lot of enthusiasm and positivity. But so it was a great kind of learning curve. And actually it helped me, I think, to be able to separate singing and doing 2 things at once. Because I had to actually lead from the bass. But I went to a Christian school, a combo church, kind of just like Foothill. But the biggest blessing of that was I got to be in a high school worship band. And that they actually had like a worship team class. And so we would pick the sets, we would rehearse. Man, that experience at that age, and then so you're preparing something, you're working with people with all these creative ideas while they're going through, braces phase, and like and angry. I'm sad 'cause I broke with my girlfriend, and you work through that through the whole, and you pray at the end of your rehearsal, or stuff like that, right? Anyway, so all the way through high school, I got to do that, and that experience was just unbelievable, and that really helped me. And then from there, I'll make this last part, quick. We had some big adventures. I went to a mega church in Missouri where I chased down Jessica because she was going to school at Missouri at Evangel University, the alma mater of Chris Lewis, actually.
Yeah.
And actually at the church I was serving, that's where I met Shane Marks, and Chris Lewis was on the preaching team.
Right.
And then Jessica, my wife, she's very smart. She got a big scholarship to study overseas, and it paid for our living expenses and her master's degree.
Yeah.
So we lived in New Zealand for years, 6 years total, and really learned how to lead worship in an international environment. Like our church, the minority was like white Caucasian, like English people. It was like a lot of Pacific Islanders and Filipinos, and the thing that was different was that here in California, it's like this kind of melting pot. But everybody,
Right.
Stephen, you look Korean, but
I do.
yes, you look Korean, but we sound the same, right?
A little bit, yes.
Yeah.
Except for my wispy voice, your
Wispy
baritone.
voice.
Yeah.
But they're like, everybody's like literally like from the other country for like 3 months or a year or two,
Right.
kind of thing. So it was so unique to actually learn and that what it was like to lead worship in that environment and see the similarities between cultures, and also see the power. Also, like some of the things we've done of singing in other language, things like that. That was something we did all the time there.
Yeah.
And to see the power of God moving the church when you kind of help people in their own kind of vernacular, or help them to, and other people get to watch other people worship God and express themselves that way. It was incredibly unifying. So that was a wonderful experience.
Awesome.
So that was New Zealand. And lastly, Hillsong, New York. That I really went to school there, I'll say, because they just, everybody in the team, every like even like the on deck guitar player could have been like a worship pastor somewhere else as far as skill set.
Right.
I'll say skill set. But I learned how to run rehearsals well and do things like that. So that was a wonderful experience.
That's great. Yeah, I think about you guys, you and Jess specifically, and how you can pull off, leading worship team and congregational singing and all that stuff. And I just think about your talent and versatility. I mean, I see you and Jess really as a team, and I can see you guys busking, in downtown Santa Monica, and then I can also see you kind of.
The thought has crossed my mind.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and you would kill it.
But it's really just for fun.
Yeah, for sure.
Just for fun.
For sure. We should do that sometime, and I'll be a plant in the audience, just yelling at you the whole time, like, "Shut up! Stop singing! You're singing the song wrong."
Leave me alone, man! Oh, I just lose it.
But I could also, busking in Santa Monica, but I'll also see you like leading worship at a large venue, as well, and you have. So, I think there's not too many people like that. So I just, I appreciate your versatility and your giftings in that way.
Yeah, it's amazing what just God uses. There's little random experiences you have, like whether it's like an interest like in musical theater, little random things you do in your life. I never would have thought that a time in New Zealand or a time over here in New York would really help me actually be a better music pastor.
Sure.
So yeah, I'm just very thankful.
Yeah.
As you get older, you see just how God brings things together.
For sure. Yeah, I think time really allows us to see things in perspective. And kind of speaking of that a little bit, like let's chat a little bit about how worship has even changed a bit over time. There's always been some give and take between churches about hymns and worship choruses, and how would you describe even how we select songs at Foothill? Yeah,
well, just to pull a presidential answer. Does you love like in presidential debates, they ask a question and they kind of say, well, what I really want to talk about is tax reform.
Okay, like sure, yeah.
Yeah, but I guess to kind of back up on the hymns and choruses things.
Sure.
You have to have both.
Yeah.
I think we see that in Scripture, Ephesians 5:19, Colossians 3:16. Paul is speaking to two different churches, and he says essentially the same thing: address each other, admonish each other in songs, hymns, and spiritual songs. And
right.
Basically, any way you slice it, Paul is encouraging us to sing biblical psalms, to sing hymns that have stood the test of time, that are theologically incredibly rich for 2,000 years, and then spiritual songs, which have been translated to some people. I don't know if it was Cosper, but they kind of argued that it actually could have been cultural melodies that were kind of used in a spiritual way. And some people said it's kind of the ongoing movement of like songwriting original songs. But any way you slice it, we're being asked to do it these three different ways. Right. And a lot of times if one church is like, no, we only do hymns, or we only do this, I fear we're kind of giving it the same treatment that people treat if you believe the spiritual gifts are for today. They say, well, I don't like how these people do it. Right. And we kind of overcorrect. Right. But if we look at Scripture, it really seems that we need to have this balance. And then after that, the philosophy, I think, is what percentage, how are we going to do that? Right. So I think for us, we do, it's probably, it's like, 30 to 40% kind of like hymn or hymns or even modern hymns. A lot of songs we sing that are kind of more like modern hymns. But really, we want it to be theologically rich, and we want it to be expressive. John Piper says something wonderful. He basically says that, love and joy is not fully complete until it's expressed. And we can kind of sit back, and I've had a lot of wonderful moments where God's moved, where I just cognitively go like, man, look at those words in that song. That's really changed me. And I can also think of times where I've been in worship and you're just kind of singing one song for a long time, and all of a sudden you just see God break somebody.
Right.
And I remember I was at another church, and there was a biblical counselor there. And that we were singing the song called "I Will Exalt You," and the song it was just really beautiful. We kept saying these words over and over, and this person who was just like a total stone faced, they finally, they just broke. They started crying. I remember later the counselor said, "I know how this sounds, but that kind of just saved me 6 months."
Wow, that's amazing.
But so I think there's a place for both, but it's dangerous when you kind of go only one way.
For sure. So I think there's 100% a correlation between saving counselors at time. I mean, as far as the power of worship music and those words breaking through. Yeah,
because music when you hear it, it's not just going through your ears. Like, it's really just kind of it's touching you as a whole person. Like, I guess to say it's touching your soul. For sure. I
mean, go to a concert, even a secular concert, and there's worship happening at the concert.
Yeah.
I mean, it's obviously the object of our worship is not biblical and right, but there's still worship happening at a Coldplay concert in a way.
Yeah, and so we were just watching the Kansas City Chiefs game, right?
Yeah,
and there was a point that our brother Lucas Parks, he was feeling very passionate. Can you imagine if he was just watching the game and he's like, huh?
Yeah.
It doesn't have so much impact, but of course, he's really a part of the experience, the game when he expressed himself. I think likewise in worship. Yeah. Like I remember the first time, I know I'm an extrovert, but I was like the kid during worship who just put my hands on the back of the chair in front of me, put my head down. Like I was like, I'm not going to move. I'm not going to raise my hands.
Sure.
I'm not doing that kind of stuff. And I remember the first time I raised my hands, and it wasn't like I'm just going to express myself moment. It was more of like, it was told out of humility. It was kind of like, I don't know, the first time you hug somebody you really love, but it was that kind
What's that like?
Well, a hug is very warm.
Sorry, that got dark.
Let's take a pause. Let's hug Stephen.
I've never been hugged before.
But it was just it's this whole body kind of just connection. Yeah, and I think it's needed.
100%. Yeah. One of the things I just want to throw in and affirm you, and also as we're talking about this, Ike, is how I've seen you grow over the years, especially the last few years in terms of your theology and your articulation of that. And we obviously, as a staff, we've talked about this for years, even when Shane was here too, but just we want to aim for good theology in our music. I mean, there are lots of good songs out there that are catchy and melodic. So flesh out just a little bit more, like what kind of stuff makes the cut? What kind of stuff doesn't? Whether it's congregational singing or theologically kind of like rich stuff. Like how do you think through that stuff?
There's a few things. It needs to be congregational. It needs to be true. And it does need to be beautiful. That's kind of a paraphrase of, there's a wonderful church, Austin Stone. Yeah. I think they straddle the fence really well of being creatively beautiful, but also being scripturally true. So it needs to be those things. But I think what really helps is to know what I'm doing. So
like anything in life, right?
But like what I'm trying to do, because really for a long time in churches, I think there's a lot of young worship pastors, and I think a lot of churches you're starting to notice. Worship pastors are starting to get older. Yep. And in the 90s, it was a lot about like that young 22-year-old guy who could have been on, because back then American Idol was cool. Actually, American Idol was probably early 2000s. But it was all about having that really good enthusiasm, presence,
Sure.
But really my job is to teach people good theology about God.
That's good.
Through song.
Yeah.
And then also let it be expressive. Let them express God with their whole body, with crying out their voice, like raising their hands, and as Piper would like I said, argue, make your joy and love fully complete in worship. So man, that really helps. I really feel for a lot, and this for these worship pastors who get to a certain point, they kind of become the conference worship leader,
right? And
now I'm not hanging out with them. I hung out with some of them at Hillsong. But there's a real danger to when you go from like a Friday night worship night to another Friday night worship night, another Friday night worship night. You kind of get into this. It kind of becomes all about like, well, we need to have breakthrough right now, breakthrough again, breakthrough, and it goes, and all the songs become about miracles and miracles. And man, we want that. I mean, man, I beg for miracles and breakthrough. Yeah. However, like you lose sight of, no, my job is to teach people about God. My job is to help them, make their joy of love fully complete the way they worship. So that really helps me choose songs. So I always kind of think like, I'm so thankful that I get to lead worship at a 9 a.m. service on a Sunday morning when it's cold.
Yeah.
And as Jared Wilson says, I think he said something like, you're a shepherd if you have the wool of the lambs on your jacket. Quote. Isn't it amazing?
Yeah,
like, but man, like he should just drop the mic. Like he could just be done if he says that quote.
Yeah, there's a faithfulness, I think, to leading worship in times where it's not, exciting, or there's not a million people out there. I mean, Chris and I talk oftentimes about preaching in the same way, that we're not trying to hit a home run every time. We're trying to just get on base. We're just trying to move the ball forward a little bit. And it's not a win if you have all these salvations and all these people kind of respond to worship or to speaking and preaching. It's just about getting on base. It's hitting a single, hitting a double, being consistent over time. And the Lord really uses that in worship as well.
Absolutely. So now that I know that that's my purpose, it's not just to say my mission is just for people to have an encounter. Sure. I've heard that many times. That was kind of my mission in my 20s.
That's kind of that's your denomination even too. It's just background. Yeah.
So now that I know that, when I look at songs and I think, is it true? Is it beautiful? Is it singable? Yeah. And I know my job is for them to take away something. That really helps. So there's a couple songs that I've really, really liked, but there's, I guess, another nuance to it is if it's also just not helpful in its wording. So it could be true, but maybe it's just not really helpful, and maybe if we could say it a better way. I remember I battled with Chris Lewis a little bit when I first came, because I came from a totally different background. Yeah. And Chris was saying like, no, we can't do this song. I'm like, it's 2 words, man. It's 2 words. But for example, there was a song I was listening to, and it was saying, it was very true. It's like, all things are possible in your name. And they even kind of got like the David and Goliath thing right. And they said, giants fall by your power. Right. I'm like, that's cool. And then it got to the bridge, and it was saying like, miracles happen when I open up my mouth. Breakthrough happens when I open up when my mouth sings. Right. And I get what they're saying. Yeah. They're saying like, when I believe in Christ. But you imagine, what about that guy Joe, who just showed, not Joe Wua, but just this guy Joe.
Joe. Shout out to Joe Wua. What's up, Joe?
What's up, Joe? I love Joe. But he's just sitting in the back drinking his coffee. Yeah. And maybe he's like, I'm feeling God's presence. And he's like, when I open up my mouth, this happens. Right. This happens. And then
they catch part of the lyric. They don't hear the whole thing.
They catch part of the lyric. Yeah. And man, that's really hard. Some of these songs are amazing. Yeah. But you get to that. But then this is where my heart goes out to these people, is that what then happens when they found out like that their sister has like stage 4 cancer? Yeah. And they're like, well, I'm just gonna open my mouth and boom, here we go. Right. But like Paul, like when Paul had a thorn in his side and he asked God to save him from it 3 times, God said, no, my grace is sufficient for you. And it doesn't happen. For sure. It's so important to be helpful.
Hey, well, so we're headed into the season of Advent in the next week. It's getting a little chilly in the weather for California anyway. What's it like curating music in this season? Is it a joy, or is it a challenge, or a little bit of both to think through carols and traditional music during December, when there's a lot of other even just like nuance of like nostalgia for people, and just how does that work for you as a worship pastor?
Well, it's an absolute joy. Yeah. I love Christmas music. I love the Advent songs like O Come, Emmanuel. It's like, just calling upon God to, redeem Israel and to come and save. I think the biggest thing that worship leaders go through during this time is it's a battle with the industry. Yeah. And I'm not trying to sound like try to fight against the man thing, but there is an industry out there that it's like, how can we reinvent this new song? Yeah. And I think there's a place for that sometimes. Like Phil Wickham has done one of the best jobs of taking a song. And I did actually have some good debates with some good people about this song, but he did Away in the Manger. He changed a couple lyrics. He, on verse 2, says, the cattle are lowing, the baby awakes, the dawn of salvation beginning to break. And I remember some people were like, why would they change that scripture? Well, the scripture was, the little Lord Jesus, no crying he makes. Okay. That's not really a theologically, that's not a battleground. So that song though, however, and he added a verse, it's beautiful. We worship you, Jesus, all of our days. Yours is the glory forever. Amen. Like, it's just really giving God the glory. I think in those cases, that's a beautiful thing. Yeah. But there are some where they just change the melody of Joy of the World. And so I think right now, what's most important to me, especially what's happened in 2020,
Sure. Yeah.
is to really just sing the theologically rich lyrics of a lot of these old Christmas hymns.
Yeah.
So other years we tried some more kind of things, but I really feel like this year I just want to sing like maybe even all 4 verses of a lot of these songs, not just the cool verses, but like sing that verse that's like, oh wow, that really makes me think,
Right.
and be more traditional. So it's an absolute joy. I do think it can change from year to year, but I know for this year I really feel in my spirit just to sing the truth of these songs.
Yeah. That's great, man. Yeah, it's a joy for just even me being in the congregation and thinking about how theologically rich Christmas carols can be, and just reminding ourselves of what we already know, about God and who He is. All right, just last question, Ike. How would you encourage our church and worship engagement in this season? Some people are still watching online. Some people are weary. Most people are weary and tired of doing church with their mask on their face and singing and community and all that stuff. How would you encourage our church in that way?
Yeah, 2 things. First, if there's a song that you really feel like God was moving and stirring your heart, I really believe the Spirit does that with songs. Like, listen to that song again, listen to it again, and listen to the lyrics, because we've thought through these songs, and specifically even for that Sunday of what's going on. I think there might be something that God is speaking that maybe your heart needs to hear and to grow in. Secondly, I'll kind of go the Piper route. Is I really would encourage people. It's kind of the old joke a lot of times, the worship pastor. And when I ask somebody to raise their hands, I'm not doing it just because it's like, hey, let's just hype up the room. I'm really doing it for the sake of their joy and their love, and for God may be fully complete and to worship with their whole body. But the old joke is like, hey, would you raise your hands? And like 20 hands of coffee cups go to lips, kind of thing.
Yeah.
But that is the church, and I love the church, But I would actually just encourage people to worship this whole body, this body made in the image of God, and as an act of worship, give it back to Him, and make your joy fully complete. Yeah. It's, when you raise your hands, it's not like this. It's not like this little antenna for the Spirit. No, it's an act of humility and loving and appreciating God.
That's really cool, because in some ways it's like, it's so limiting. We have these masks on. We can't sing the way we want to. And it really does force us to think more about worshiping with our whole self. And it's like, hey, yes, I have a mask on, but I can still raise my hands. I can still kneel to my feet, kneel to my knees. Yeah. And in some ways it's a blessing to allow ourselves to be pushed in thinking about what worship is in this season. Quick speed round questions for Ike here at the end of our podcast. Is there a book you've been reading lately that's been a blessing to you, or something that you would pass along to the rest of our church?
It would be the Wingfeather Saga.
Great.
This is like a fantasy series.
Yeah.
I feel like a nerd talking about Lord of the Rings and now the Wingfeather, but this is like extremely approachable and very funny. I think I know Owen's reading it, right?
Yep. Owen's like all done. He's read it all already. He loves it.
It's like, there are books that somebody says, you should read this fantasy trilogy, and you're like, no, I shouldn't. That's like 5,000 pages, and it's whatever.
Right.
But like the Wingfeather Saga, it's shorter, and it's written. It's so funny, but it's also so rich. Like, and there's really virtuous themes in it.
Yeah.
But it's not done like, well, here's a big virtuous monologue, which just sounds like they just regurgitate some scriptural things. So Wingfeather Saga, have your kids read it yourself. I actually started reading it out loud with Lyric and Gabe, but I noticed, man, they just light up. And the best part about that, though, and I'll just say, parents, if you're listening, there's really good themes that come up, and it gives you a chance to kind of like try your hand at kind of discipling your kids, because a lot of times it's hard to bring up things on your own. You don't want to let's have a family meeting and talk about this thing.
Right.
This thing comes up, and you get to talk about it, and plus, it's done so winsomely in the book. It's just helping you.
That's awesome. That's great. Ike, what are you looking forward to most maybe when things settle down in 2021? Is there a trip? Is there a restaurant? Is there an experience? I know you and I get a lot of joy out of those kinds of things. What's something that you're looking forward to?
I'm looking forward to restaurants with other people.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to
eating off each other's plates and stuff. Yeah, that's gonna be awesome.
Yeah, I'm looking for but you know what it is though, is I think because of all this junk we've been through and the self-analysis we've done, I think conversations and relationships will be better.
For sure.
Because I think there's a lot of errors and things that we thought we were into, and things we thought were important to us that people are kind of just ejecting.
Right.
And maybe even, frankly, there might even be some relationships that we won't have anymore that will allow a faster lane into drawing closer to the people that we really should. And I think it's okay. Sometimes we think we need to have like 20, 30 friends. Maybe it's like, no, these are the people that I really I really gravitate towards and I lean into.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward, I think, to richer relationships too.
That's great. That's a good word to end on, man. Well, hey, I appreciate your time. Thanks so much for sitting down and doing this podcast, man.
Dude, it was really nice that we did it in the pastoral hot tub. Ethan, you can turn off the bubbles, bud.
With the microphones, it didn't get wet at all. It was great.
Yeah, it was just really made for a great conversation. Thanks, Steven.
All right. Well, we're out of time, but thanks for joining us for our podcast, Footnotes. Be sure to subscribe, and we'd also appreciate you sharing this resource with others, and even leaving us a favorable review if you feel so inclined. So until next time, Foothill, peace be with you. Stop singing. You're singing the song wrong.